You laid awake last night doing math in your head. Rent, car payment, insurance, gas, groceries, the credit card minimum, the electric bill that jumped $90 for no reason. And when you added it all up, the number was bigger than your paycheck, and your chest got tight. And your eyes stayed open in the dark, and you thought to yourself, how is this not a collapse? How is this not the crash? How are they still saying the economy is fine when I cannot afford to exist? And then you woke up this morning and turned on the news, and a man in a suit told you GDP grew 1.6%, and unemployment is 4.3%, and the stock market hit another record high, and you felt something break inside you. Not anger, something quieter. The feeling of being gaslit by your own country, of being told you are doing fine by a system that is watching you drown and calling it swimming. I am going to explain to you exactly why the economy has not collapsed. Not because I think it is fine. It is not fine. You know it is not fine. Your bank account knows it is not fine. But the numbers on television say it is. And there is a reason for that. The numbers are being held up by 10 things. 10 artificial props that are making the economy look functional while you personally are falling apart. The top 10% of Americans drive 50% of all consumer spending, and their spending alone is dragging the GDP into positive territory, while the bottom 80% has barely kept pace with inflation. The AI investment boom from 5 companies spending $700 billion a year is carrying half of GDP growth, and the chief global strategist at BCA Research said it is plausible the economy would already be in a recession without it. Credit card debt hit $1.252 trillion at an average APR of 23.79% because Americans are borrowing to buy groceries, and the government counts those borrowed dollars as growth. The federal deficit is injecting $2 trillion a year directly into GDP with borrowed money. And the unemployment number you see on television was redesigned in 1994 to exclude the people who gave up looking for work. Every metric that is supposed to tell you the truth about the economy was changed at some point in the last 30 years to make the economy look better than it is. The CPI was redesigned to assume you will switch from steak to chicken when prices rise. GDP counts government borrowing as economic activity. The stock market is being carried by 7 companies and $900 billion in stock buybacks. And the housing market has not crashed because 80% of homeowners are locked into mortgage rates they will never see again, and refusing to sell is the only thing standing between your home's value and a free fall. The economy has not collapsed because 10 props are holding it up, and every single one of them is cracking. Number 10. The top 10% of Americans are propping up the entire economy by themselves, and nobody told you that when they stop spending, the GDP number that makes everything look fine collapses overnight. Moody's Analytics published a finding that should have been a national emergency and instead was treated as a footnote in a Wall Street Journal article that most people scrolled past. The top 10% of American earners now account for 50% of all consumer spending in the United States. 50%, 1 in 10 Americans is responsible for half of all the money that moves through the economy, and consumer spending makes up roughly 70% of GDP. Which means the top 10% alone is responsible for approximately 35% of the entire gross domestic product of the richest country on earth. And Mark Zandi, the chief economist at Moody's, did not mince words about what that means. He told the Wall Street Journal that the finances of the well-to-do have never been better, their spending never stronger, and the economy never more dependent on that group. And then he told Bloomberg something even more unsettling. He said he is not comfortable with it. The chief economist of one of the most respected analytics firms in the world said he is not comfortable with the structural foundation of the American economy, because here is what that number actually means for you. When the government announces that GDP grew 1.6% in the first quarter, which it did, and the headlines say the economy is expanding, which they did, what that number is actually measuring is the spending habits of the wealthiest Americans. It is not measuring your life. If you are in the bottom 80% of earners, and statistically you almost certainly are, your spending barely outpaced price increases. The Wall Street Journal documented that the bottom 80% spent 25% more than 4 years ago, but prices rose 21% in the same period. That is a 4% real increase over 4 years, 1% per year. Barely treading water. The top 10% spent 58% more. That is the gap that is hiding the collapse. Because when the government says the economy grew, it is averaging the 58% surge at the top with the 4% crawl at the bottom and producing a number that looks healthy. But the number is a lie. It is a statistical artifact that masks the fact that the majority of Americans are stagnating or declining while a small fraction is spending so aggressively that their consumption alone drags the GDP number into positive territory. And the reason the top 10% is spending so aggressively is the wealth effect. Their stock portfolios are at record highs. Their home values are at record highs. Stock ownership across U.S. households hit an all-time peak, accounting for 30% of total wealth in 2024, and that was before the 2025 run-up, according to Oliver Wyman. And Stanford's SIEPer confirmed that wealth effects are currently contributing $100 billion, or 0.4%, to GDP growth. Take the wealth effect away, and that 1.6% GDP growth drops to 1.2. Take the AI investment boom away on top of that, and you are flirting with zero. And the economy that looks fine on television is actually being held up by a group of people small enough to fit in a football stadium in every city in America. And when that group stops spending, and they will stop spending the moment the stock market corrects, or the AI bubble pops, or the housing market cracks, the GDP number does not gently decline. It crasters. Because 50% of consumer spending disappearing from the economy in a single quarter is not a recession, it is a depression. And you will not see it coming, because the GDP number that is supposed to warn you has been lying to you for years by counting the spending of people who live nothing like you as evidence that you are doing fine. Number 9. Artificial intelligence investment is carrying half the GDP growth in the country, and if you remove it, the United States is already in a recession that nobody has announced. Peter Berezin, the chief global strategist at BCA Research, said something in 2025 that should have stopped every financial commentator on television mid-sentence. He said it is certainly plausible that the economy would already be in a recession without the AI boom. Already in a recession, without the boom. That is not a fringe blogger on Substack. That is the chief global strategist at one of the oldest and most respected independent investment research firms in the world, telling you that the American economy, underneath the headline numbers, is already contracting. And the only thing preventing the official declaration is the spending frenzy of 5 technology companies building data centers. Business investment linked to artificial intelligence may have made up half of all inflation-adjusted GDP growth in the first 6 months of 2025. Half. Barclays estimated that software, data center projects, and computer hardware together boosted GDP growth by roughly 1 percentage point. And the 5 leading public AI companies, which are Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, and Apple, have collectively committed to spend upwards of $700 billion this year on big-ticket AI projects, according to Moody's Analytics. $700 billion from all companies. That is more than the GDP of Saudi Arabia being spent in a single year by a group of executives who all sit in the same zip codes in California and Seattle. And that spending flows directly into GDP. Every data center that gets built, every server rack that gets installed, every mile of fiber optic cable that gets laid, every construction crew that gets hired, every electrician and HVAC technician and concrete pour and steel delivery that goes into building the physical infrastructure of AI counts as economic growth. And the wealth that those companies create in the stock market flows into consumer spending through the wealth effect we just discussed. When Nvidia's stock price doubles, the engineers and executives who hold that stock feel richer and spend more. They buy homes, they buy cars, they renovate kitchens, they eat at expensive restaurants, and all of that spending counts as GDP growth. But here is the part that nobody is saying on television. If you subtract the AI investment boom and the wealth effect it generates from the GDP number, the underlying economy is flat or negative. The non-AI economy, the economy that you and I live in, the economy of grocery stores and car payments and rent checks and pharmacy visits, is not growing. It is contracting. And Moody's Analytics modeled what happens when the AI bubble bursts. They projected that nearly $20 trillion in shareholder wealth evaporates. $20 trillion. And when that wealth evaporates, the wealth effect that has been propping up consumer spending reverses. Moody's called it a swing from a tailwind for consumer spending to a powerful headwind. Businesses begin laying off workers. Lower and middle-income consumers pull back further, which leads to more layoffs, which leads to more pullbacks, a self-reinforcing negative dynamic that intensifies into a recession. And Deloitte's Q1 2026 economic forecast confirmed that consumer spending has been heavily dependent on top earners, who are likely more influenced by changes in their financial portfolios. They projected real consumer spending to grow just 0.2% in 2027 and to fall by 1% in 2028 as the AI-driven wealth effect fades. And Oliver Wyman warned that a bursting AI bubble could evaporate the paper wealth that is currently propping up high-end consumption. And the comparison they used should terrify you. They compared it to the dot-com bust when the Nasdaq crashed 80% from its March 2000 high and the S&P 500 fell 50%. And the AI bubble is bigger, the valuations are higher, the concentration is tighter, the dependence is deeper, and the economy underneath it is weaker than it was in 2000, because in 2000 the consumer had savings and low debt. In 2026, the consumer has $5.1 trillion in credit card and auto loan debt and a savings rate that has been declining for 2 years. The AI boom is not a sign that the economy is healthy. It is the 4 drip that is keeping a dying patient's vital signs on the monitor. And when the 4 comes out, the flat line that was already there becomes visible to everyone at the same time. Number 8. Americans are borrowing money they cannot repay at interest rates that would have been illegal in most states 30 years ago, and the spending that borrowing creates is being counted as economic growth. 111 million Americans cannot pay their credit card balance in full at the end of the month. That number comes from the Federal Reserve's May 2026 Household Debt Report. 111 million people carrying a balance, paying interest, every single month. And the interest rate they are paying is not what your parents paid. The average credit card APR climbed to 23.79% in May 2026, according to Federal Reserve data, marking the first increase since September 2025, 23.79%. In the 1990s, most states had usury laws that capped consumer interest rates at 18 to 24%. Some capped them at 12. The rates that 111 million Americans are paying in 2026 would have been illegal in half the country 3 decades ago. And the total amount they owe is staggering. Credit card debt reached $1.252 trillion in Q1 2026, according to the Federal Reserve's quarterly report. Equifax's Market Pulse report, published 1 week ago, confirmed that total consumer debt hit an all-time high of $18.19 trillion in March 2026. And the Equifax report said something that should make every economist in America put their models down and stare at the ceiling. They said the record was heavily influenced by an increase in subprime borrowers opening new bank cards and carrying higher balances. Subprime borrowers, the people with the worst credit, the people least able to service new debt, they are the ones driving the growth. And the banks are letting them, because the banks raised the aggregate credit limit to a record $5.5 trillion in Q1 2026, according to Wolf Street's analysis of the Federal Reserve data. They expanded credit lines on existing cards to encourage more spending and more swipe fees. The banks are handing loaded weapons to people who are already bleeding. And here is how this connects to the illusion that the economy has not collapsed. Every dollar a consumer borrows on a credit card and spends at a grocery store, a gas station, a pharmacy, a restaurant, or an online retailer counts as consumer spending. And consumer spending counts as GDP. The government does not distinguish between a dollar spent from savings and a dollar spent from debt. They are the same dollar in the GDP calculation. Which means the record $1.252 trillion in credit card debt is not a warning sign in the GDP framework. It is fuel. It is the thing that is keeping the consumer spending number positive, even as the savings rate has collapsed from 6.2% in early 2024 to 4.0% in Q1 2026. The personal savings rate fell by more than a third in 2 years, and the shortfall landed directly on credit cards. Invest documented that disposable income rose, but the savings buffer evaporated, and that shortfall is being funneled directly into revolving credit. You are earning more. You are saving less. And the gap between what you earn and what you need is being filled by a credit card charging you 23.79% interest. And when you swipe that card to buy groceries because your paycheck ran out 4 days before the end of the month, the government counts that swipe as evidence that the economy is growing. The University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index hit 53.3 in March 2026, which is 5.5% below February, and deep inside what the survey defines as recession territory. Anything under 60, the people who are doing the spending are telling the surveyors that they feel like they are in a recession, and the GDP number is saying they are not. Both things cannot be true, and the one that is lying is the one you see on television, because the GDP number is counting borrowed money as growth. And borrowed money is not growth. It is future consumption pulled forward. It is spending tomorrow's paycheck today. And when the credit cards max out and the banks stop extending limits, and the delinquency rate, which already hit 4.8% of all household debt, crosses the threshold where lenders pull back, the consumer spending number does not gently decline, it falls off a cliff. Because the spending was never real, it was debt pretending to be prosperity, and the economy that is built on it is not an economy, it is a timer. Number 7. The federal government is spending $2 trillion more than it earns every year. and that deficit spending is being injected directly into GDP as if it were real economic activity. The United States federal government collected approximately $4.9 trillion in revenue in fiscal year 2025 and spent approximately $6.7 trillion. That is a deficit of $1.8 trillion, nearly $2 trillion more going out than coming in. And that $2 trillion does not vanish into a bureaucratic void. It enters the economy. Every Social Security check, every Medicare payment, every military contract, every federal employee paycheck, every infrastructure project, every research grant, every stimulus payment, all of it counts as economic activity. All of it flows through businesses and households and shows up in the GDP number. And nobody on television tells you that without that $2 trillion annual injection, GDP would contract immediately and violently, because here is the math that nobody wants to do on camera. GDP in 2025 was approximately $29 trillion. The federal deficit was approximately $1.8 trillion. That deficit represents roughly 6% of GDP. If you remove the deficit spending, GDP growth does not just slow, it goes deeply negative. The economy is not growing on its own. It is growing because the government is borrowing money from the future and spending it today, and the GDP calculation counts that spending as evidence that the economy is healthy. It is the exact same trick as the credit card debt we just discussed, except at a national scale. Then the cost of maintaining that trick is accelerating. Interest payments on the national debt exceeded $1 trillion in fiscal year 2025 for the first time in American history. The United States government is now paying more in interest on its debt than it spends on national defense, more than the entire military budget, just to service the debt. Not to pay it down, to pay the interest on it. And the national debt has reached $39 trillion. And the Congressional Budget Office's latest projections show that debt rising to $50 trillion within a decade under current policy. And the debt-to-GDP ratio, which is the measure that economists use to determine whether a country's debt load is sustainable, has already exceeded 120%. The threshold that economists historically consider dangerous is 90%. The United States blew past that years ago. And here is where the trick stops working. When interest payments consume an increasing share of the federal budget, there is less money available for everything else. Less for Social Security, less for Medicare, less for infrastructure, less for education, less for the military, and the government faces the same impossible choice that Illinois faces with its pensions. Raise taxes, which slows the economy, cut spending, which removes the injection that is propping up GDP, or borrow more, which increases the debt and the interest payments and makes the next year's problem even worse. And the people who buy American debt, the foreign governments and institutional investors who purchase treasury bonds, are watching this math, and they are diversifying. Central banks around the world reduced their dollar reserve holdings to 56.9%, the lowest since 1995. They are buying gold at record rates. They are building alternative settlement systems through CIPS and BRICS. They are not panicking. They are calmly, methodically reducing their exposure to a country that is spending $2 trillion more than it earns, paying $1 trillion in interest, fighting a $1 billion a day war, and showing no political willingness to address any of it. The deficit spending is the largest single prop holding the economy up. And the moment the bond market loses confidence, the moment Treasury yields spike, because buyers demand a higher premium for the risk of lending to a country that cannot stop borrowing, the cost of everything in America goes up simultaneously. Mortgage rates, car loans, student loans, business loans, credit card rates, all of them are priced off Treasury yields, and when Treasuries spike, the entire credit architecture of the American economy reprices in weeks. The deficit is not a policy debate, it is the life support machine, and the machine is running out of credibility. Number 6. The unemployment rate that they show you on television is designed to make the economy look better than it is, and the real number would cause a panic if it were ever the headline. The official unemployment rate in the United States is 4.3% as of the most recent Bureau of Labor Statistics report. That number is called U3, and it is the number that every news anchor, every politician, and every headline writer uses when they want to tell you the economy is healthy. 4.3% near historic lows. Nothing to worry about, except U3 does not measure what you think it measures. U3 counts only people who do not have a job, are actively looking for one, and have looked within the last 4 weeks. If you gave up looking because you sent 200 resumes and got 0 callbacks, you are not unemployed, you are not in the labor force, you do not exist in the U3 number. If you were working full-time making $60,000 and got laid off and are now working 15 hours a week at a gas station making $11 an hour because that is the only thing you could find, you are employed. You are counted the same as the person making $200,000 at a tech company. One job is one job in U3 regardless of whether that job can feed your family. If you want to work full-time but can only find part-time work, you are still employed. If you are working 2 part-time jobs with no benefits and no stability and no predictability, you are employed. If you are driving DoorDash at midnight after a 12-hour nursing shift because your salary does not cover rent, you are employed. Twice. And the BLS has a different number that is closer to reality. It is called U6, and U6 includes the officially unemployed plus the marginally attached workers who want a job but have stopped looking, plus the involuntary part-time workers who want full-time work but cannot find it. And U6 in Q1 2026 is approximately 7.8 to 8.1%, nearly double the headline number. And even U6 does not capture the full picture because it does not account for the quality of employment. It does not distinguish between a union manufacturing job with healthcare and a pension and a gig delivery job with no benefits, no stability, no sick days, and a vehicle that is depreciating faster than the income it generates. The Fulcrum published an analysis in January 2026, noting that the economy is adding fewer jobs than most periods outside of recessions, and that consumers, the largest driver of economic growth, continue spending perhaps unsustainably with strength becoming increasingly uneven. Increasingly uneven means the people at the top are spending freely, and the people at the bottom are spending on credit cards at 23.79% interest. And the labor force participation rate, which measures the percentage of working-age Americans who are either employed or actively looking, has never fully recovered from the pandemic. It dropped from 63.3% in February 2020 to 60.1% in April 2020, and as of 2026, sits at approximately 62.5 to 62.7%. That gap represents millions of Americans who left the workforce and never came back. Some retired early, some went on disability, some became full-time caregivers because childcare costs $15,000 to $25,000 a year, and their job paid $35,000. And some simply gave up. And none of them are counted as unemployed. And the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research confirmed that the labor market is in a low-hire, low-fire pattern. Companies are not laying off workers in large numbers, which keeps the unemployment rate low. But they are also not hiring, which means if you lose your job, finding a new one takes longer and pays less. And the BLS itself acknowledged that the government shutdown prevented the collection of important economic data that Federal Reserve policymakers use to make their decisions, raising the risk of a policy miscue and potential downturn. The agency responsible for measuring the economy admitted it could not collect the data needed to measure the economy. And the Federal Reserve is making interest rate decisions based on incomplete information from an unemployment metric that was designed to exclude the very people who are suffering most. The 4.3% unemployment rate is not a measurement. It is a marketing number, and the economy that it describes does not exist for the 111 million people carrying credit card balances, the 40 million who are energy burdened, the 771,000 who are homeless, or the 45% of households that Brookings says cannot make ends meet. The economy has not collapsed because the number that would tell you it has collapsed is not the number they put on television. Number 5. The housing market has not crashed because 80% of homeowners are locked into mortgage rates they will never see again, and refusing to sell is the only thing standing between your home's value and a free fall. 5 days ago, Voss Block published an analysis that used a phrase no housing economist has ever had to use before. They called the 2026 housing market a state of rational inertia. Not a bubble, not a boom, not a correction. Rational inertia. A market that is frozen in place because every participant is making a perfectly logical individual decision that, when aggregated across 85 million homeowners, creates an artificial reality that masks the underlying collapse of affordability. Here is what rational inertia means in practice. During 2020 and 2021, when the Federal Reserve dropped interest rates to near zero, millions of Americans locked in 30-year fixed-rate mortgages at 2.75 to 3.5%. Those rates are gone. They are not coming back. The current 30-year mortgage rate is hovering near 6.7%, and JP Morgan Private Bank confirmed that approximately half of all current U.S. mortgage borrowers are still paying sub-4% rates, and roughly 80% are paying under 6%. That creates the lock-in effect. If you are a homeowner with a 3% mortgage, selling your house means giving up that 3% rate and taking on a new mortgage at 6.7%. On a $400,000 home, that is the difference between a monthly payment of $1,686 and a monthly payment of $2,594. That is $908 more per month, nearly $11,000 more per year, for the same house. So you do not sell, you stay. Even if your job moved, even if your family outgrew the house, even if you got divorced, even if you want to be closer to aging parents, you stay because the math of moving is economically irrational. And when 80% of homeowners refuse to sell, the supply of existing homes on the market collapses. And when supply collapses, prices stay elevated. Not because demand is strong, demand is weak. Affordability is at a 40-year low. The monthly payment on a median-priced home is nearly double what it was 4 years ago. Redfin confirmed that you need $110,000 in annual income to afford the typical home, and the median household income is approximately $81,000. Millions of prospective buyers are priced out, but prices do not fall because there is nothing for sale. JP fights and exploits of Redefined. Morgan estimated the current housing shortage at approximately 2.8 million units and said it could take around 10 years to resolve. NHB put the shortage at 1.2 million units and noted that the construction industry has nearly 300,000 unfilled job openings, meaning the industry cannot build fast enough to close the gap even if it wanted to. And here is where the illusion props up the broader economy. Home values represent $19 trillion in wealth held by homeowners over 65 alone, according to Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. Total homeowner equity across all age groups is north of $35 trillion, and that wealth drives the wealth effect we discussed earlier. Homeowners who see their Zillow estimate hold steady or inch upward feel wealthier. They spend more confidently. They take out home equity lines. They renovate. They consume. And that consumption flows into GDP. But the value is artificial. It is the product of a frozen market where prices are held up by a lack of sellers, not by robust demand. And the Vast Block analysis called it the worst affordability picture in recorded U.S. housing data. Recorded, as in, worse than any point since they started measuring it. And the bomb that nobody is talking about is sitting in the demographics. Between 2026 and 2036, an estimated 13 to 15 million baby boomer-owned homes will hit the market as owners age, downsize, enter assisted living, or pass estates to heirs. That is 250,000 surplus units per year for a decade. And those homes are concentrated in the suburbs and exurbs that were built for the car-dependent, cheap energy lifestyle that $12 gas is about to make unlivable. When the boomer wave hits, the artificial scarcity that is holding prices up disappears. And the $35 trillion in home equity that is making homeowners feel wealthy enough to keep spending gets repriced. And the wealth effect reverses, and the GDP that depended on it contracts. The housing market has not crashed because homeowners are trapped in golden handcuffs. But the handcuffs do not change the fundamentals. They delay the reckoning. And delayed reckonings are always worse than timely ones. Number 4. 7 companies are responsible for nearly all of the stock market's gains, and if you remove them, the market that your retirement depends on has been flat or declining for 2 years. The S&P 500 hit record highs in 2025. That is the headline. That is the number your financial advisor shows you. That is the chart the cable news anchor puts on screen when they want to tell you the economy is healthy, and it is the single most misleading number in American finance. Because the S&P 500 is a market cap-weighted index. That means the largest companies by value have the most influence on the number. And 7 companies, Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon, Nvidia, Meta, and Tesla, known as the Magnificent Seven, account for approximately 30% of the entire index weight, in an index of 500 companies. 7 of them control nearly a third of the number. And those 7 companies are all driven by the same thing, the AI investment boom. When Nvidia's stock doubles because data center spending surges, the S&P 500 goes up. When Microsoft's stock climbs because of Azure AI revenue, the S&P 500 goes up. When Meta and Alphabet surge because advertisers are paying more for AI-targeted ads, the S&P 500 goes up. And the other 493 companies in the index, the ones that represent the actual breadth of the American economy, the retailers and the manufacturers and the banks and the healthcare companies and the utilities and the industrials, many of them have been flat or declining. The equal weight S&P 500 index, which gives every company the same influence regardless of size, has dramatically underperformed the cap-weighted version. The gap between the two has been the widest in over 2 decades. That gap is the distance between the economy of 7 AI companies and the economy that you live in. And here is why this matters for your life specifically. Your 401k is almost certainly invested in index funds that track the S&P 500. Your retirement account is riding on a market that looks healthy because 7 companies are carrying it. And those 7 companies are valued based on the assumption that AI will transform the global economy and generate trillions in revenue. If that assumption is correct, the valuations are justified. If it is even partially wrong, if AI monetization takes longer than expected, if regulation slows deployment, if the infrastructure spending does not generate the returns that the $700 billion annual commitment requires, the correction will be severe. Oliver Wyman compared it to the dot-com bubble, where the Nasdaq crashed 80%. Moody's modeled $20 trillion in shareholder wealth evaporating, and Deloitte projected consumer spending falling 1% by 2028 as the wealth effect reverses. And here is the detail that should keep you up at night. S&P 500 companies spent over $900 billion on stock buybacks in 2024, near the all-time record. A stock buyback is when a company uses its own cash to purchase its own shares on the open market, reducing the number of outstanding shares and mechanically increasing the earnings per share and the stock price. It is financial engineering. It does not create a job. It does not build a factory. It does not develop a product. It takes money that could have gone to workers or R&D or capital investment and uses it to inflate the stock price. And the executives who approve buybacks are compensated in stock options that increase in value when the stock price goes up. So the people deciding to do buybacks are the same people who benefit from them. And the retirement accounts of 100 million Americans are being supported by a stock market that is being inflated by 7 AI companies and $900 billion in buybacks in a single year. Remove the Magnificent Seven. Remove the buybacks. And the stock market that your financial advisor says is healthy is flat or negative. The market has not crashed because 7 companies and a financial engineering trick are holding it up. And the moment either one falters, the retirement savings of an entire generation reprices to reflect the economy that actually exists underneath the illusion. And that economy, the one with $18.19 trillion in consumer debt and 4.0% savings and 111 million people carrying credit card balances and 45% of households that cannot make ends meet, does not support a stock market at all-time highs. It supports one at all-time lows. Number 3, the economy has already collapsed for the bottom half of America, and the only reason it does not look like a collapse is because you have been taught to look for the wrong thing. You are waiting for a crash. I know you are. Every person watching this video has a picture in their head of what an economic collapse looks like. It looks like 2008, stock market plunging, banks failing, Lehman Brothers on the news, people carrying boxes out of office buildings, foreclosure signs on every lawn, bread lines, panic, a single, dramatic, unmistakable event that everyone agrees is the collapse and after which everything is different. And because that event has not happened, you look around at your life and you think, well, it has not collapsed yet. But what if you are looking for the wrong thing? What if the collapse already happened and you missed it because it did not look like a movie? Brookings published an analysis confirming that 45% of American households cannot make ends meet. Not struggling, not tight, cannot make ends meet. 45%. That is nearly half the country. The Federal Reserve found that 37% of Americans cannot cover a $400 emergency without borrowing. Redfin says you need $110,000 a year to afford the typical home, and the median household income is $81,000. There are 771,000 homeless Americans, most of whom work. There are 14 million hungry children. There are 530,000 medical bankruptcies per year, 66.5% of all bankruptcies. There are 264,000 deaths of despair annually. There are 22.4 million cost-burdened renters. There are 19.7 million cost-burdened homeowners. There are 40 million who are energy-burdened. The personal savings rate is 4.0%. Credit card debt is $1.252 trillion at 23.79% APR. Student loan delinquency is at 17.01%. Total household debt is $18.19 trillion. Consumer sentiment is in recession territory at 53.3. And 90% of Americans say the country is experiencing a mental health crisis. That is not an economy that has not collapsed. That is an economy that has collapsed for the bottom 50% and is being statistically hidden by the spending of the top 10%, the AI investment of 5 corporations, the deficit spending of a government borrowing $2 trillion a year, the lock-in effect of a frozen housing market, the buybacks of companies inflating their own stock, and an unemployment metric that was redesigned to exclude the people who are suffering most. Every prop I have shown you in this video exists to maintain one thing: the appearance of normalcy. Because the appearance of normalcy prevents panic, and panic is the one thing the system cannot survive. If the 111 million people carrying credit card balances all stopped paying at the same time, the banking system would collapse. If the 80% of homeowners with locked-in rates all tried to sell at the same time, the housing market would crash. If the Magnificent Seven all corrected simultaneously, the retirement accounts of 100 million Americans would lose 30 to 40% of their value. If the government stopped deficit spending, GDP would contract 6% overnight. The system is not stable, it is holding its breath. And the props that I have been describing are not solutions. They are pressure releases on a boiler that is running hotter and hotter. Each one delays the reckoning while making the eventual reckoning worse. The credit card debt grows while the interest accrues. The government deficit grows while the interest compounds. The housing affordability gap grows while the boomer inventory builds. The AI valuations grow while the monetization gap widens. And the unemployment metric stays low while the labor market hollows out underneath it. The economy has not collapsed the way you expect it to collapse, but it has collapsed the way empires actually collapse. Slowly, unevenly, silently, one household at a time, until the day the props fail simultaneously and the thing that has been happening for years becomes the thing that everyone can finally see. And on that day, the headlines will say the economy collapsed, and you will know that they are wrong, because it collapsed a long time ago. They just were not counting the right people. Number 2. Every single metric the government uses to tell you the economy is fine was redesigned at some point in the last 50 years to make the economy look better than it is, and nobody told you they changed the ruler. In 1994, the Bureau of Labor Statistics changed the way it calculates the Consumer Price Index. Before 1994, the CPI measured the cost of a fixed basket of goods, the same items measured the same way, year after year. If a steak cost $5 last year and $6 this year, inflation was 20%. Simple, transparent, painful for politicians but honest for consumers. After 1994, the BLS introduced substitution effects. If steak prices rose too fast, the model assumed consumers would substitute chicken. So instead of measuring the rising cost of the things you actually buy, the CPI began measuring the cost of the things the government assumes you will switch to when the things you actually buy become too expensive. And the result was a lower inflation number. Not because prices were lower, because the metric was redesigned to count a cheaper product as your product. And in 1999, the BLS introduced hedonic adjustments. If a computer costs the same as last year but has a faster processor, the BLS adjusts the price downward, because you are getting more value for the same dollar. On paper, the computer got cheaper. In your wallet, you paid the same amount. But the CPI records a price decrease. And the cumulative effect of these two changes over 25 years is staggering. John Williams, a private economist who runs shadow government statistics, has been calculating inflation using the pre-1994 methodology for over 2 decades. His estimates consistently show inflation running 3 to 5 percentage points higher than the official CPI. That means if the government says inflation is 3.5%, the rate you actually experience at the grocery store and the gas pump and the pharmacy counter is closer to 6 to 8%. And here is why that matters for everything else. Social Security cost of living adjustments are tied to CPI. When CPI underreports inflation, your Social Security check goes up less than prices do. You lose purchasing power every year, and over a 20-year retirement, the gap compounds. A retiree in 2026, whose check has been adjusted by the official CPI since 2006, has lost an estimated 30 to 40% of their purchasing power compared to what they would have had under the pre-1994 methodology. And GDP is reported in real terms, meaning adjusted for inflation. When the government says GDP grew 1.6%, that is 1.6% after subtracting inflation. If inflation is undercounted by 3 percentage points, real GDP growth is not 1.6%. It is negative 1.4%. The economy is contracting, and the inflation adjustment is hiding it. And the unemployment metric we discussed earlier, U3, was redefined in 1994 by the same BLS in the same year. The old methodology, which included discouraged workers and marginally attached workers in the headline number, was retired and replaced with the narrower definition that excludes the very people who are suffering most. And the GDP calculation itself counts government deficit spending as economic activity, even though it is funded by borrowed money. It counts credit card spending the same as savings-funded spending. It counts the stock buybacks that inflate corporate earnings without creating anything. It counts the AI investment boom that 5 companies are driving without distinguishing it from broad-based economic growth. Every single metric, CPI, GDP, unemployment, all of them were changed. All of them were changed in ways that make the economy look better than it is. And the American people were never told that the ruler was changed. They were just told the measurement and expected to trust it. And when a person says, "I do not care what the GDP says, I cannot afford my life," they are not being irrational. They are being more accurate than the metric, because their lived experience is being measured against a ruler that was shortened to make the number look longer. And the economy has not collapsed, because the instruments that would tell you it has collapsed were recalibrated to prevent that conclusion from ever appearing in a headline. The thermometer was adjusted so the fever never registers, but you can feel it. You can feel it in every grocery trip, every gas fill, every insurance renewal, every time you check your bank account 4 days before payday and realize there is not enough. You know the economy has collapsed because you are living inside the collapse. The metric just refuses to confirm what your body already knows. Number 1. The props are failing. All of them, at the same time, and the only question left is whether you prepared before they did. I have shown you 10 things that are holding this economy up. 10 artificial supports, each one massive, each one fragile, and each one beginning to crack under the weight of the reality it was designed to conceal. The top 10% is driving 50% of spending. But Moody's chief economist said he is not comfortable with it. And a 10% stock market correction wipes out the wealth effect that drives their consumption. The AI boom is carrying half of GDP growth, but BCA research said the economy would plausibly already be in a recession without it. And Moody's modeled $20 trillion in shareholder wealth evaporating when the bubble bursts. Credit cards are financing the illusion of consumer strength, but $1.252 trillion at 23.79% APR with 111 million people unable to pay in full is a timer, not a strategy. And Equifax confirmed 1 week ago that the growth is being driven by subprime borrowers, the exact population that triggered the 2008 crisis. The federal deficit is injecting $2 trillion a year directly into GDP, but the national debt is $39 trillion. Interest payments exceed $1 trillion, and central banks are dumping dollar reserves at the fastest pace in 30 years. The unemployment rate is at 4.3%, but U6 is nearly double that. The labor force never recovered, and the BLS admitted it could not even collect the data the Fed needs to make decisions. The housing market looks stable, but it is frozen by rational inertia, not demand. 80% of homeowners are locked in. Affordability is at the worst level in recorded data, and 13 to 15 million boomer homes are about to flood the market over the next decade. The stock market is at record highs, but 7 companies are carrying the index. $900 billion in buybacks is inflating the prices, and the equal weight index shows the real economy has been flat. The collapse has already happened for the bottom half, but the metrics that would confirm it were redesigned to prevent the conclusion from ever appearing. The CPI undercounts, the GDP overcounts, the unemployment metric excludes, and the media reports the numbers without disclosing the asterisks. 10 props, every one of them cracking. And the question is not whether they all fail. The question is whether they fail one at a time, which gives you months to adjust, or whether they fail together, which gives you days. And here is what you can do right now, not next month. Now, understand that the GDP number, the unemployment number, the stock market number, and the CPI number are not descriptions of your life. They are descriptions of a system designed to make itself look functional. Stop using them as your mirror. Use your bank account. Use your grocery receipt. Use your gas bill. Use the number in your savings account. Those are the real metrics. Build a 90-day emergency fund, not a 30-day fund. 90 days. Because when the props fail, the recovery is not measured in weeks. It is measured in quarters. And the person who has 90 days of expenses in cash and a stocked pantry and no high-interest debt is the person who survives the transition without losing their home, their health, or their mind. Pay off every dollar of credit card debt you can. At 23.79%, every dollar you carry costs you 24 cents per year in interest. That is money being extracted from your future and handed to a bank that is simultaneously raising your credit limit to encourage you to borrow more. The credit card is not a tool. It is a trap. And the system that is propping up the economy is funded by your inability to escape it. Learn something that cannot be measured by GDP. Grow food, repair an engine, build a shelf, cook a meal from ingredients instead of a box, teach a child something useful. Every skill you acquire is an asset that does not depreciate, cannot be repossessed, and does not require a functioning stock market to retain its value. Know your neighbors. I will say it in every video until the day I stop making them. The person next door is your infrastructure. The community around you is your safety net. The government that is $39 trillion in debt and paying $1 trillion in interest and fighting a war it cannot afford is not coming to save you. Your neighbor might. And finally, stop waiting for the collapse. It already happened. You are living in it. The only difference between today and the day the headlines finally confirm what you already know is that today you still have time to prepare. Tomorrow, you might not. The economy has not collapsed yet because 10 artificial props are holding it up, and every single one of them is failing.